In this video, we're installing a 100-watt solar setup on our boat, and we're going to show you how easy it is to install it in your RV, van, home, or camper. We go over all the parts you'll need and where to find them, what they actually do, and how to install them step by step. It doesn't get any easier than this.
Today we're going to be installing a very basic 100-watt solar kit, and we're going to be installing that on our boat. This kit that we're going to be installing today can be set up in your RV, it could be set up for off-grid, it could be set up in your home or in your boat, like in our case. I'm going to show you all the materials that we're going to use, and I'm going to do a quick breakdown of how this system works. A quick rundown: basically you have the sun gives off energy. We have our solar panel, which collects that energy. That energy travels through its wires and it comes to this charge controller, and that does exactly as its name says. It controls the charge, the power coming through, which sends that energy to our battery. That battery is going to store the energy that comes from the sun, and then the way we get energy out of that is through this inverter. The inverter changes the direct current that's stored inside this battery. This inverter converts that energy to AC, so we can power things like blenders, coffee makers, things like that.
Anything you need to plug in.
Anything that you need to plug in, like in your
Phones,
house, phones,
tablets, whatever.
and that's what this inverter does. And that is the system in a nutshell. We're gonna go over each piece of equipment in detail, and all the connections, all of the safety equipment that we need, like the breakers and on and off switches, the crimping material that we're gonna need, the wire, and what type of wire and what sizes we need. All of those things we're gonna go over, and we got a special discount for you guys regarding this special battery that we have today, and we're going to talk about that more a little bit later. All right, so this is the setup that we're going to do. If you already know or have a basic understanding of how this works and want to skip forward to the installation, you can go ahead and do that, but I'm going to talk about each individual piece for those of you that don't know. So this is a 100-watt solar panel, okay, and it's a flexible panel, and we chose this type of panel because we're going to put it on our bimini top, but there's stiff panels that you can use as well. Now, these have these wires here, okay, that connect. These are short, these are about 6 feet, and we need longer ones since it's going to go on top of our bimini. So we got these on Amazon, and we'll put the link in the description below, so we can run these down into our cabin. In between the wires that run from the solar panel to the charge controller, we are going to install a 12-volt breaker. Okay, this is going to allow us to cut power coming from the solar panel, and that's a good safety piece. You don't need this, but it's a good thing to have, so you don't have power running through the system all the time. You want to turn it off, so that's that. This is our 30 amp Renogy charge controller, which our wires connect to here. If you notice here on the solar charge controller, you'll see this little solar panel sign. That's where these two connect, the red being the positive, the negative, the black being the negative right here. So those connect into here. Now we need to connect this to our battery, okay? So we're gonna have a positive and negative that come out of here, and the positive will have a breaker, a 30 amp breaker, because this is a 30 amp system. So a breaker through our positive cable will connect to here, okay? And then those two cables, a positive and negative, will connect to our battery via battery terminals. So there's different types of crimpers. I'll show a couple different ones up here, but this is the crimper that we're gonna be using to crimp our wires. The size cable is going to be dependent on how long the run of the wires are, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. Our battery from EnjoyBot, LiFePo 12 volt 100 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery. We're going to connect those wires through these terminals, the right size terminals, okay, and that is going to allow this battery to charge. Like I said earlier, if we're trying to get the power out of this battery, we have our inverter. Now, in order to connect this inverter to this battery, we're going to need some wires, and these wires are usually thicker, okay, 2-gauge wire, 2-auger wire. It depends on the length of the run. We're going to talk about that when we do the installation. All right, and we're going to protect those wires with these fuses. These are mega fuses, and these are 125 amps. We're going to talk about the calculations that you're going to need to know about what size fuses you guys are going to need for your setup, and I'll explain that a little later. Once that's connected, we have our inverter that we turn on, and we can plug in our coffee machine, we can plug in our phones to charge. And the reason why we're going to use this on our boat is because we're planning on running a refrigerator on our boat. This lithium battery can keep a refrigerator running for a few days, so that'll be for a future video. But that's the basic setup. This is a real simple setup that you can use in your home, in your RV, if you're off grid, in your car, or even in your boat like we are. So let's get started with the installation. So we're gonna start off with the flexible solar panel, and that's gonna go on top of our bimini top, and I'm gonna show you how we do that. All right, so here we have our flexible solar panel, and it's gonna go on top of our bimini top of our 1985 Grady White. If you're into boats, check out our channel. We've done a whole restoration job on this boat. We go camping on it, and that's what we're gonna use this particular solar panel for. So we decided we're gonna place this on top. What's nice about these flexible solar panels is that they're flexible and that they have these nice little grommets that we can tie down to the bimini top to hold it down. So my plan is to put this up on here, and as you can see, we got plenty of space. As you can see from the outline, look how much space we got. We could probably put 2 of these things if we wanted to up here, really. But we're gonna see exactly where we're gonna tie this down to, because we have to connect these wires and run them down the bimini top here. So let's see. All right, so this is where we decided to put the solar panel. We could have laid it this way, but it was going to be a little harder to hold it down. So what we did is we cut some holes and used some zip ties to tie to the frame of the bimini. And as you can see over there, what we're going to do is we're going to run these wires. We zip tied them here nice and neat, just like this. And we're going to run them down the bimini. And this is what's going to go into our cabin. So let's connect here. Now we have our cables that come from the solar panel. So we have our negative, labeled negative, and our positive, labeled positive with the P. So these are the extensions that we got. The links to all of this are going to be in the description below, so you can find these on Amazon. So we have our positive and we have our negative. Now there's really no way to mess this up, as they're different connectors, right? So they're going to clip in just like this, and this one's going to clip in just like that. You'll hear it click, right? You want to tug on that, make sure it's good. Now, we don't have it, but there's a fuse that goes in here too that you want to place to protect the wire. Right. Nice and clean. It's on the outside, but we can't run it really through the pipes, so this is where it's going to have to stay. And I think that looks pretty good. Still have access to these guys if we need to disconnect for whatever reason. Let's run the cables to the cabin. Just do here. Do you see that at all? Up top?
Yep.
All right, so we're gonna install our on-off switch, and I chose to place it here. So basically, we have the wires that come from the solar panel, and we're going to organize these just like this, and they're going to come in this way, or like this, positive and negative, red positive, black negative, and they're going to go into here. So let's get these situated. Okay, now one thing I didn't mention is that this wire is a 10 gauge wire that comes from the solar panel. Depending on how long the length of the run is of your wire and how many amps you're running through there is going to depend the size wire that you use. This is a 30 amp system. This is more than enough for this small, maybe 8-foot run of wire. And then we use the other pieces to connect here, and this is going to go to our charge controller. When you guys are cutting these wires to place them inside like this or here or like in the charge controller, you want to be able to cut off about 1/2 inch off the sheathing, and that's going to slip up inside here, and just like in the charge controller that I'm going to show you now. So now let's install the charge controller, and I'm going to place it right here. Perfect. So that's set up there. All right, now what we have to do is we have to put these guys in here. If you see here, there's a little solar panel, obviously indicating that these are the wires that from the solar panel that go in here. And we have our positive, which is our red, and that's going to go inside here. That's going to go in there. And then our black, which is our negative, and that's going to go up in there, and we're going to tighten that up. Tighten those up, and there we go. So that's all set up. Tug on them, make sure that they're nice and tight. Now what we're going to do is we're going to turn on the system, right, to see if this works. So it should light up, and there it goes. So it lit up blue. Blue means lithium batteries, but the way to set this up for your battery system, whether it's gel batteries or lead acid batteries, you're going to hold this for about 7 seconds, and then that blue light should start flashing, right? So it's flashing, and then you just click to toggle through. So green is for sealed battery, orange, which is for gel, and then you have red for flooded, but we're gonna keep that on lithium. And then you leave it alone and it's set. It's gonna be set there. So let's turn off the system, because now we turn it off from here. Now we have to run the wires that go from the solar charge controller to the battery. All right, so that's gonna be the same gauge wire that we used, right? The same 10 AUG cable that we used, all right, that we cut up. And we're going to run that to the battery. But before we run those to the battery, we're going to need a breaker that comes off of the positive wire here. And this is to protect the wire. It's a 30 amp breaker because this is a 30 amp system. So we're going to place this here, and our positive cable is going to run straight to here. And I'll show you how we do that now. Alrighty, so now we're going to run the positive wire to this 30 amp breaker. I have here the same 10 AUG cable that we've been using, okay, and I cut it to the correct size, and this goes in just like this. In order to get this to get these terminals on, you're going to need a crimper like this, okay, and these crimpers come with these little dies that are specifically for the size wire that you're using, so you're going to want one of those. And I'm going to show you how we crimp that now in a second. So the way you use it, put the terminal, and this is a terminal. You don't want those copper ones, you want to use these. You tighten this down here, you fit that just in there, and then you hold it in place and you start cranking down on it. What I've also done is I've placed a heat shrink over this wire just to protect it. Place that in there. We're going to tighten that up, and we're going to tighten this up. All right, so now we have our 10 AUG cable, a 10 AUG wire that runs from the breaker and the charge controller to the battery. And I've done the same thing to this wire. I've added the terminal, which goes right to the breaker. Okay, we're going to tighten that down, and then we have our negative that goes right up to the negative terminal of the solar charge controller. So we're going to connect that now. Now we have our wires connected. We have these neat little covers to protect it, and we're going to keep this off for now just so we don't have any power in the system, even though everything is disconnected, but I want to just be safe. So now we're going to run this through, and we're going to run this to the battery. Now that we're going to be installing the battery, this is a great time to talk about the sponsor of today's video, which is EnjoyBot batteries. And a huge thank you to EnjoyBot for sending us this awesome battery. Without them, this video wouldn't be possible. This particular battery is a 12 volt 100 amp hour group 31 battery. It has a built-in 100 amp battery management system. This battery also has the cold temperature protection. This also has over 5,000 life cycles and a lifespan of about 10 years and full discharge capabilities. So you can take this thing down to zero and charge it back up. One of my favorite things about this battery is the weight, because on a boat you want to try to keep things as light as possible. This battery weighs in at about 23 pounds compared to the 60 or 70 pounds that maybe a comparable lead acid battery might weigh. So that's a huge advantage that we have over this. So let's continue with the install, and let's see where we're going to put this thing. So we're going to be placing the battery in here in this compartment that's in the cabin. We got to run those wires that we ran from the solar charge controller in here. We're going to have to eventually put a tie down system for this battery. The great thing about these batteries is that you could place them sideways, you can place them upright, you can place them upside down if you wanted to for whatever reason, but you could. So we have our positive charge controller wire, and we have our negative charge controller wire, and we've crimped that. And what's great about these batteries, it has these M8 bolts, so it makes this super easy to connect to. We're going to adjust the wiring once we're done and get everything fixed up. So now that that's connected, technically our system can charge this battery. So our solar panel is ready for charging the battery. Now, in order for us to get power out of this battery, we need the inverter. All right, so here's the inverter that we're going to be using. It is a 1000 watt pure sine wave inverter. Depending on what your application is and what kind of things you're going to need to be charging on your particular setup,
is going to determine what size inverter you're going to need. And we're going to be charging our cell phones, we're going to be charging our mics and stuff like that, so that doesn't take much power. The most that we're going to be using to charge is going to be a 12-volt fridge that maybe pulls 40 watts, if that. This is going to be sufficient. We're also in South Florida, so we get a lot of sun. We are going to set this up here, and we want, here you have the AC outlets, okay, just like in your house. And here's the connections that go to the battery. They come with these little guys like this. Now, if you're going to be running electronics and stuff like that, we recommend that you use a pure sine wave inverter versus one of the regular cheap ones that are half the price. Those can damage your equipment. This sine wave is basically pure sine wave. It's designed to mimic the power that you get out of your AC panel at home, just like your at-home plugs. You spend the money on getting a pure sine wave. It's going to protect your equipment. So let's go ahead and install that. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that this has a grounding wire here. This grounding wire, obviously, we're not going to use that on this boat because it doesn't fit our application. But if you're using this at home, you want to check the manual for the inverter to see if you have to connect this to some type of grounding wire, grounding system or not. And if you're using this in your car, it might ask you to connect it to the chassis. So that's going to be dependent on your application. We don't need it in this application. This inverter also comes with this really cool LCD screen that allows you to turn the inverter off and on instead of having to come to the inverter. So if you have this in a spot where you don't want to reach, then you can actually put this control box somewhere else, up to 5 meters away. I think I might leave this up at the helm. I'm not sure yet. Now that we have our inverter set up, now we have to run the wires that run from the inverter to the actual battery. Now, this is where it becomes very important what size gauge wire you're using. The run of this total wire system from the inverter to the batteries is no more than maybe 5 feet. Your run might be different. How do we calculate the amount of amps that are going to be running through those wires? Because that is what's going to determine the size gauge wire we're going to use along with the length. Well, this is a 1000 watt inverter and this is a 12-volt system. If you divide 1000 by 12 volts, you get 83 amp draw. But we have to account for inefficiency of the inverter, which is typically 80%. So you would also divide that by 0.8, which would give you 103 amps. Now, if you look at the chart, the right size cable for our length and our draw is roughly a 4-aught cable, but we have available 2-aught cable. That's what we have. So we're going to go one size up and that should be fine. We have our terminals that we're going to use and we're going to crimp them the same way using our crimper and our heat shrinks that we're going to place on there, and those are going to be connected to this part of the inverter. Alrighty, so now we're going to connect our cables to the inverter. Right, there we go. Now we're going to go back and tighten all these wires up and just try to get this neat before we continue. So we have our negative and our positive 2-aught wire that are coming from the inverter, and we have to connect it to our battery. But before we do that, we have to talk about this fuse that we have to put on this positive wire to protect it. Now, the calculations that we did said we need about 104 amps. So for protection, the next fuse up, the next size fuse up would be 125. And what this is a 125 amp fuse. And we're going to connect it to the positive wire that's going to go right on the battery. You want it as close to the battery as possible. This is right on the battery. So let's go ahead and set that up. Now, in connecting this, you might get a spark when you connect here. So you can use a resistor. I don't have one. You can use a resistor to tap that with the positive and negative, and you won't get the spark. But I don't have one. So we're going to go ahead and connect it. So we have our negative and we have our positive. I like to put the bigger draw or the bigger terminals on the bottom and then the other terminals on top. And we zip tied everything together. All right, we have our fuse in place that you see there. Alrighty, now we have a nice and clean system. Everything is nice and neat and organized. Let's go ahead and turn this system on. Just make sure everything works. Make sure your breaker is back where it's supposed to be. Let's turn on the solar. Look at that. All right. We're getting solar power. We have the battery working. And now let's turn on our inverter. There it goes.
Let's just make sure no wires are getting hot. No smoke, no fire. Well, let's go ahead and try this LCD screen. Let's try the LCD screen, see what it does. Battery is full, AC 118 volts. Okay, so if I want to turn it on, let me see. Oh, look at that. All right, so what you do is you come over here, you turn it off. Okay, inverter's off. And then you hold this button, boom, and it turns it on for you. That's fantastic. Alrighty, so now we have our drill connected to the inverter, and let's see what this draws. So peak was like 220 and continued to be 160. So that is the final setup. We have our extra cables here. I'm gonna leave this here for now. If I want to move it, I have all the extra wire if I have to. Everything else is working perfectly fine. We have another project that we want to do. We actually have a 5,000 BTU hatch AC unit that goes right up here, and we're trying to run that system off of lithium batteries. And we're thinking a few, maybe 4 112 volt amp hour batteries to run that. We run a generator, but it can be noisy, and we want something a little quiet, more quiet for the nights that we spend out on the hook. So if you guys have any suggestions, we'd appreciate it if you write them down in the comments. Also, we put a link in the description below for $20 off your next order of EnjoyBot batteries. The code is PFB20. If you guys like this video, please like and subscribe. We'll see you on the next one.